Hello everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know me, if you're new here, my name is Christine Rodriguez, and I have a podcast called Astrology Now Podcast, where I post much more frequently. I post at least once a week to my podcast that's available on all platforms, and I post weekly to my Patreon account as well, patreon.com/astrologynowpodcast. It has been a very long time since I've posted to YouTube. I've been incredibly busy, very grateful for everything that I've been busy with, and I had some time today, so I thought it could be fun to record a video on Ashtakavarga. This is something that I find is profoundly helpful, and so I'd love to share it with you all as well. So first of all, for discussing Ashtakavarga, it is helpful to have an astrology program. So there are a few popular programs, Parashara Light, Jyotistar by Dr. Andrew Foss. Those are two really popular ones, and there are a few other Vedic astrology programs out there as well. And of course, you can also Google to try to find a generator somewhere. So getting into this point system, what is the Ashtakavarga system? So if you have one of these programs and you've been stumbling around, you may have found charts that look like this, and perhaps you had no idea what they mean. We are going to figure that out today. So as you can see in this chart, there are various charts for each of the planets. And so what this reveals to us is how positive or negative a transit is going to be for each planet through each house, for each individual, because all of us are going to have different charts. So using this chart as an example, this is one of my good friends who gave me permission to use their charts. Looking at Saturn, okay? So in this chart, Saturn has 5 points in Aquarius at the top of the chart, 3 points in the second house, 5 points in the third house, 3 points in the fourth house, 2 points in the fifth house, 3 points in the sixth house, 0 points in the seventh house, etc. So what this means is we're going to look at the movement of Saturn, because Saturn is one of the slow moving planets. You know, we can look at the sun or the moon or Venus, and it's incredibly important, but it's just going to last about a month's span of time. A planet like Saturn, it's going to be in that sign, in that house, for 2.5 to 3 years. So we really want to pay attention to the movement of Saturn. Of course, it's also going to impact us with Saturn return or Sade Sati. So this is going to help us determine even more what a transit is going to be like. So again, looking at his chart, when Saturn is passing through Aquarius, there are 5 points in Aquarius. This means that the transit is going to be very good. So the higher the points, the better the transit. When we look at the 7th house, we see that there are 0 points in the 7th house. And I asked him, I was doing research on this, and I was like, what were these years like when Saturn was in Leo? And they said that this was the most challenging part of their life, okay? That's what's going to happen. When Saturn moves through that house, that sign, with low points, it's not going to give the best results. And so in the Ashtakavarga system, this is an 8-point system. The higher the number, the better. Lower the number, the worse. But, you know, you'll see a lot of like 2s and 3s and 4s. And the way that I was initially taught is that 1, 2, and 3 are pretty bad. Okay, and then it starts getting relatively okay around 4. But the majority of charts I look at have, you know, most of their houses are going to have 2 or 3, and of course their whole life isn't going to be bad, you know, it would be impossible. So that being said, also in my research, I found that it doesn't really get bad unless it's like 0 or 1. The 0 points and the 1 points are when it's predominantly difficult. And then, you know, 2 and 3 is like mediocre. There can be some challenges. It may not be the most shining part of your life. And then 4 and 5 gets to be pretty good. Anything above that is going to be fabulous. Okay? And the other thing that I want you all to keep in mind is that we need to consider the transits as well. We have to consider which planets are with Saturn, what dasha you are running, Because if your Saturn is moving over a house that has maybe 1 point, let's say you are a Gemini ascendant, you have 1 point in Gemini, Saturn's moving into Gemini, but you're in a really positive planetary period, it may not be as bad as if you were running a difficult Mahadasha or a difficult Bhukti for your chart. The difficult Bhukti, of course, is going to amplify things. So let's use my friend as an example. When Saturn was transiting Leo in their chart, said it was the most difficult point in their life, had they been running a difficult Bhukti, it would have made it that much worse. So we still want to take the planetary periods into account, and we also want to consider, is it Saturn transiting the 7th, or is it Saturn and K2 transiting the 7th? We want to consider everything as usual. Okay, we're never just going to look at this point system and make a clear answer just from using this. We always want to consider the dashas and the bhuktis and the other transits as well. And so again, the major takeaways with the Ashtakavarga is the higher points, the better, the lower points, the worse. Things aren't usually too bad unless it's 0 or 1. 2 is kind of a struggle. 3, from what I've seen, isn't really that bad. And so that was looking at Saturn. So let's go ahead and look at the sun. Let's take a look at the sun for my friend. So looking at the sun, we see that when the sun is in Aquarius in the first house, they get 4 points. When the sun is in, it would be Pisces, in the second house, it gets 2 points, so on and so forth. When we get to the 5th house with Gemini and the 6th house with Cancer, suddenly the sun is getting 5 points. So we can say that during the year when the sun is moving through Gemini and Cancer, they may be having a little bit of a pick-me-up. It may feel a little bit better. Looking at Mars, we see that in the ascendant in Aquarius, Mars gets 5 points. And then when Mars is in the 4th house in Taurus, it only gets 1 point. So this is important. We can let our friends know, hey, when Mars is moving through Aquarius, this is a pretty supported time for Mars. When Mars is moving through Taurus, you might experience a little bit of difficulty, especially in relationship to that house, the home, the vehicle, your inner happiness, maybe even your mother. But I want to go back to Saturn. So looking at Saturn in my friend's chart, again, Saturn receives the lowest amount of points in the 7th house. So yes, that can affect relationship, the spouse, intimacy, business partnerships. That's what we would want to tell our friend to be mindful of. If there were 0 points in the 10th house, where Saturn is passing over the 10th, we would want to say to be careful with career, the authority, the government, things of that nature. Now, 2 big transits that people talk about a lot and get freaked out about a lot are going to be Saturn return and Sade Sati. Some people have horrible Saturn returns. Some people have wonderful Saturn returns. That was another thing with my friend. They were like, my Saturn return was great, which we can talk about. Same with Sade Sati. Sometimes people move through Sade Sati, they get famous, they get a wife, they get rich, they get all these amazing things. Other times in Sade Sati, their entire life falls apart. So how can we determine if Sade Sati is going to be good or bad? So first of all, when assessing Saturn for Sade Sati or Saturn return, what planets are with this transit? So using Saturn return as an example, is Saturn also sitting with Mars? Is Saturn also sitting with Rahu? Is Saturn sitting with another planet? And what dignity is Saturn in? Is Saturn in its own sign of Capricorn and Aquarius where it feels pretty good? Is Saturn debilitated in Aries? That's going to have an effect on how your Saturn return feels. Next, we can look at the Ashtakavarga. How many points does that house have for Saturn? So, for example, looking at my friend, they have Saturn sitting in the 10th house. So when they had their Saturn return, Saturn was passing over natal Saturn, they have 4 points in the 10th house. So it's not going to be a bad Saturn return. So find your Saturn, find what house it's in, find how many points it has. That's going to help you determine how challenging or easy breezy your Saturn return is. So next, let's talk about Sade Sati. So Sade Sati is the 7.5 year period where Saturn is transiting the house before, the house of, and the house after the placement of your moon. So, for example, if you have the moon in Gemini, that would mean that your Sade Sati is when the Saturn is passing through Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer, because it's the sign before, the sign of, and the sign after. If your moon is in Aries, your Sade Sati is going to be when Saturn passes through Pisces, Aries, and Taurus. So you want to see how many points are in each of those houses to determine how each 2.5 year period is going to be for your Sade Sati. So let's go back and use my friend as an example. So their moon is going to be in Libra. So we see that Libra has 3 points. That's not that bad. When Saturn is passing through Libra, it's going to have 3 points. When it's passing the sign before in Virgo, it has 4 points. Not too bad. And then, of course, in the 10th house, when it's passing through Scorpio, it will also have 4 points. So for my friend, Sade Sati is not going to be that challenging of a time. If, of course, you're looking at your own chart and Saturn's placement have 0, 1, or 2, again, the lower the point, the more challenging that 2.5 year period is going to be. So that is how Ashtakavarga works. The final thing that I will say is these charts work very similar to the birth chart in that it affects that area of the chart. So again, if it's the 9th house with low points, it could be the father, dharma, virtues. If it's the 1st house, it can be your physical self, physical health, vitality, how you appear to the world. As I mentioned, for relationships, if it's the 7th house, it will affect the marriage partner, relationships, business partnerships. So that's going to give us insight when we're assessing the Ashtakavarga charts, which area of life it's going to be affected. So that was the Ashtakavarga. Let's go ahead and look at the Sarvashtakavarga. So if you click a few pages away from where you are now on your program, you'll come to find a chart that looks like this. And so this is essentially a chart that compiles all of the individual Ashtakavarga charts together to get a summary of each house. So here we can find which houses are just generally more powerful, which houses are going to be generally weaker for transits. And so again, using my very generous friend as an example, the 1st house has 38 points. That looks pretty good, okay? Just as a reference point, again, for the Ashtakavarga, low points are like 0 to 1. That's pretty challenging. 2 to 3 is pretty okay. There may be some hardships. 4 to 5, it starts getting pretty good. Anything above that is great, okay? And so for the Sarvashtakavarga, the way that I was taught is anything below 24 is considered low points. Anything below 24 or below is considered, you're getting pretty low. Or anything below 24, I should say. But when we get into the teens, that's when things are very, very low. High 30s is very, very high, very, very beneficial. So again, looking at my friend, having 38, that's high 30s, 1st house is pretty good. When planets are transiting through Aquarius, we like that. That's pretty nice. The 2nd house has 24 points, 3rd house has 23, 4th house has 22. And so the 4th house having 22 points, that would be Taurus. So planets passing through Taurus may have a weaker effect. They may not be as beneficial for this individual. Of course, the 9th house as well, with Libra having 23 points. But looking at my friend's chart in general, there's nothing in the teens. There's nothing below 17. So there's nothing that I would deem as pretty bad. Are there going to be difficulties? There are always going to be difficulties. This is the way life works, right? But I would say this is a pretty fair chart, a pretty fortunate chart. And if you have really low points, if you have a 0 or a 1 in an Ashtakavarga, if you're looking at this chart and you have something in the teens, it's completely okay. And this is the beauty of Vedic astrology because there are remedial measures built in. So you want to find, of course, what planet you're concerned about, what sign you're concerned about, and just start working with a mantra that feels appropriate for you, maybe working with different meditations, different pranayama. There are always things that we can do to strengthen the planets and to help give a remedial effect to these things. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that it all made sense. Again, I'm kind of in a hurry today, so I feel like I sped through that, but I think that it's super interesting and it's so profoundly helpful when determining how a transit is going to be. So to finalize, it doesn't mean that you throw regular transits out the window or you throw the planetary periods out the window, because we still want to consider the natal planets that are being transited. We want to consider how many planets are going to be conjoining and what planets, what dignity. We want to consider the dashas, the mahadasha, and the bhukti. All of this information, in addition to what we discussed today, will help us determine how a planetary period, how a transit is going to play out. But again, it is a relatively simple way to figure out how the Saturn return is going to be, how the Sade Sati is going to be. So again, I hope this was helpful. My name is Christine Rodriguez. Again, please check out my podcast, Astrology Now. I will talk to you all very soon.